Okay, so like I said, we're only getting through part of the notes because we just are out of time. And the idea behind this lesson is that we were going to learn 3 different ways to calculate interest for either on a bank account, or maybe you're paying off a car loan or a credit card. Um, you're earning interest on a savings account. We were going to learn 3 different ways of doing that, but we're only going to get through this first way right here for simple interest. And simple interest is when your interest is calculated only one time over a given period of time. So a really simple example is this. Let's say you put $100 into a savings account and you earn 1% annually on that amount, okay? Here's what that would mean. Your interest is calculated one time over the year. It's 1%, so 1% of 100 is $1, okay? And at the end of the year, you'd have $101, okay? So your amount that you put in, that 100, is called your principal amount, okay? The rate that you're earning interest is the 1%, and then the time length that you're earning that is a year. And so it's calculated one time over the year. The other formulas we're going to talk about are when the interest is calculated multiple times over a period. And what we're going to end up doing is just doing examples of those next week, just as in class. But they won't be on your test Thursday because we don't have time. We're running out of time. But we will look at them because they use the exponential functions, which was the whole point of learning them, was so we could also then talk about them in interest, but we just won't do it for your test on Thursday. So the simple interest we're going to talk about, I've got 2 different formulas here. The first one says I equals PR2. So we're going to spend a moment just defining the variables. The I stands for interest, obviously. So in the example I gave you, oh, never mind, let me not say that just yet. The P stands for principal with AL at the end, not LE. It's the principal, which is your starting amount. So in my example, it was the $100. The R is the rate that you're earning interest or paying. But when you're doing math on the rate's always in percentage, right? Like a 1% annual rate or something like that. But you'll notice this R is in an equation. We're doing math on it. We're multiplying by P and T. To multiply, you always have to convert to a decimal first. So it's a rate as a decimal. And I'm just going to take a second to review how to do that. So let's say your percentage rate is 5.65%. Well, to convert from percentage, you may remember you have to divide by 100. And that converts it to 0.0565. So we don't do math on the percentage. We do math on the converted percentage, and we convert it by dividing by 100. But in some of the problems, you might have solved for your answer, your rate. It might be asking you for the rate, and you solve, and you get 0.0565. But you have to answer as a percent. In that case, you would do the opposite and multiply it by 100. So if you want to do math on your percent, you divide by 100. If you want to change your answer back to percent, you multiply by 100. And that's something to keep in mind when we do problems. And then the T stands for time in years. And I'm going to put years in capital letters because it's important. Yeah, and we're going to talk. Well, okay. So Brandon asked, will it change? It will always be years, but your problem might give you a portion of a year, and we're going to talk about how to handle that. But the equation is set up to always be represented in years for t. And then the second example, the a equals p1 plus rt, the a equals, or the a stands for accumulated value. So like the example I gave you with the $100 and the 1%, your accumulated value at the end of the year is 101. That would be your total, what you started with plus your interest. So another way of thinking about that is A equals P, which was the principal amount, plus the interest I. But we just learned that I is PRT, so I'm actually going to replace that I with PRT. And then if you notice, those two terms have a GCF of P, so I'm going to divide that out. And what that leaves me with is 1 plus RT, which is, that's how we get this formula right here. So it seems like a whole second thing that's independent of the first, but there's overlap. Yeah, 1 plus RT. And then this helpful tip section is for plugging in for T when you're given a problem, but the T in the problem is not in years. Like for example, if I told you that I'm going to earn 1% over 6 months, well, you can't plug 6 in for T because it's months. T is years. But what portion of a year is 6 months? A half. So you put a half in for T. Does that make sense? So if I'm trying to calculate something and it's over 6 months, I would put in 1/2 for T. T is always years, but sometimes you might have a fraction of a year. And so that's what this table is talking about over here for the helpful tips. So if you're plugging in for T and T is not in years, you need to use a fraction. And this table will give you the denominator for those fractions. If you're given a time in months, your denominator would be 12. So like 6 months would be 6 out of 12, or 1/2. If you're given a time period that's days, your denominator would be 365. And if you were given a time period in weeks, the denominator for your fraction would be 52. And as I scroll up, the second part of the helpful tips, you don't need to write that down. We're not getting to that. We're not getting to any of this, sadly, but we will after the test. And then one example quickly for the helpful tip section. Let's say if time is 7 months. Then T would be 7 over 12. And that would be what you plug in to T, because that's the fraction of the year. And we're going to do one example from your homework problems as practice. Does anybody need this screen up anymore before I switch? So, oh yeah, if time is 7 months. And then on your homework sheet, since we didn't get to most of the notes, these are the only problems you're responsible for right now on your homework, number 7 through 13. That's the only simple interest. And I'll do one random one from there. What number would you like? 7, 9, 11, or 13? 9? Okay, so take a minute and read 9 to yourself, and then I'll talk about it. Okay, if you're watching this video at home, I want you to pause now, read the problem, and try to figure out what you're given. The formula we're working with right now is we have I equals PRT. Try to find where those are in the problem. Are you given I, P, R, T, and what are you being asked to find, which variable? And so when I read through this problem, here's the things that I found. He borrowed $260, and 3 weeks later he paid it off for $297.50. So this 260 is the starting amount. That's the P. 3 weeks later, that's your time. He paid off the note for $297.50. And then it says, what was the annual interest rate on this loan? So it's asking you to find R. This is what we're looking for. And then this $297.50 is your accumulated value. And so since we have A, we're going to use this formula. A equals P times 1 plus RT. So let's just plug in the things that we already know, right? So we know A is $297.50. That's the accumulated value at the end of the term. So I'm going to put $297.50 for A equals P, which we said is 260. Parentheses 1 plus R. R is going to stay R because that's what I'm looking for. And T is time, but were we given in weeks or years? Weeks. So if it's not years, you need to make a fraction. So it's 3 weeks out of how many total weeks are in a year? 52. And then you can simplify this if you wanted to, or you could keep it 3 over 52, but I believe it's 14, right? 14 times, oh no, it's not. I don't think so. Oh, you can't divide by 3. Never mind. Scratch that from the record. It's just 3 over 52. So R times 3 over 52. Okay, and now we just need to solve this equation for R. You might be tempted to distribute the 260, but it would be easier if you just divide it off here. So then that leaves me on the right 1 plus 3 over 52 times R. And then on the left, 297.5 divided by 260 is 1.144. And then subtract 1 from both sides. Gives me 0.144 equals 3 over 52R. Times the reciprocal to both sides. So that's 2.5 rounded on the left equals R, but remember, R needs to be converted back to percent. So I do 2.5 times 100, and that gives me 250%. So don't take a loan on your car at Check Cashier's Inc. because they're going to charge you 250%. Yes, Brandon. I did 52/3 times 0.144. Yeah. And then